Hi everybody, it's Kirsty. Today I wanted to talk about responsibility and OCD and the various ways that responsibility is relevant to the topic of OCD. I think that we as OCD sufferers have quite a complicated relationship with responsibility and the feeling of responsibility. Whether that's feeling over responsibility or in fact avoiding responsibility, it's definitely good to be clued up about the role of responsibility in OCD, and also the role of responsibility in our recovery as well. So firstly, I want to talk about the assumption of over responsibility and how that almost forms as a trigger in OCD, and actually lays probably the foundation for various themes in OCD. So firstly, there's some people, this is not something I've necessarily experienced, but I'm aware that people, some people feel the need to do compulsions, whether that's physical compulsions or mental compulsions, but to run through rituals in order to keep people safe in case something bad happens to them. For example, I've actually read quite a lot about children, like younger people, having to do certain rituals, otherwise they think that something bad will happen to their mum or their sister will die or something. So this is actually linked to the cognitive the cognitive distortion of magical thinking. Because actually, if we look at it in scientific terms, whether or not you go through a ritual in your mind or if it's a physical ritual before bed, that has absolutely nothing to do with something bad happening to somebody else in the world. If on the very small chance something did happen, it would simply be nothing more than a coincidence. So I've read a lot about people suffering with those types of OCD. Personally, for me, I would have the thoughts a little bit, but it wouldn't necessarily stick. So I think as somebody who I don't feel like OCD was a big factor in my childhood, it's not something I feel like I've suffered from a whole lot with the idea of magical thinking. But I did have some superstitions when I was a teenager, but again, it didn't cause me a huge amount of suffering. One of the ways that overinflated sense of self-responsibility has shown up for me though, and I do remember feeling like this sometimes as a child, was an extreme kind of responsibility for other people's feelings and happiness. If I as a quite a sensitive child, I would always pick up on other people's moods, and if something was stressing one of my parents out or something, as I moved into being a teenager, I would feel like I couldn't be properly happy again until they were feeling better, even if it was something that was nothing to do with me. It was to do with my mum or dad's work situation. It would bother me and it wouldn't feel right to me to feel like I could truly relax and be happy. And that is something that has come along with me into my adulthood, and kind of ended up translating into a bit of people pleasing. I've still found myself feeling overly responsible for other people's feelings, and it kind of has tied into my not wanting to people to misunderstand what I mean, so feeling then like I have to over explain myself to ensure that I hadn't offended them or upset them. I found myself at times feeling overly responsible for the continuation of friendships, feeling like I had to follow up and make sure that we'd speak and things, and even though it's it's a two-way street. And I have found myself also feeling completely responsible for things being good in my relationship, and of course that's very much a 50-50 thing. I think factors in our OCD is in some ways it can be you feeling like you have to make sure that nothing bad happens to the relationship because it's important to you, but you're not actually responsible for how your partner feels and behaves. That's their decision, and that's their responsibility. So that's a couple of ways it's shown up for me. Other ways would be for me is work-related anxiety. I would assume responsibility for things that were out of my control at work. And I'd be too afraid to necessarily ask about something, just assuming that I should know how to do this. It's got to be my fault. So now I need to make sure this gets done and cover up. I've later learned actually that I don't have to assume responsibility for all things at work. And if I don't know about something and I haven't come across it before, I can ask, because it's okay if, I don't know. And if I make mistakes, for example. But I think that that is another thing that potentially drives people with physical checking compulsions as well. It's an over responsibility for other people's safety sometimes. So for me, again, that's not necessarily something I've experienced too much of. I did experience a little bit of the urge to continuously check the environment for my dog when I first brought him home when he was a puppy, but of course with this kind of thing you do need to assume responsibility for, you are responsible for your pet's safety. But I know that some people have gone to very extreme lengths to ensure the safety of their loved ones, even when it's actually nothing to do with them and it's not in their control. So those are some ways that I'm aware that sort of hyper-responsibility shows up within OCD themes. Some of those things I've experienced and some of it not so much, but I'm sure there's many other ways. The other way that I feel that responsibility is very relevant when it comes to OCD recovery is to try to make sure that you're not avoiding responsibility. It might be that if you are somebody who suffered with a feeling of sort of over responsibility, once you start learning about it, you then see that that's been a cause of a lot of your suffering. So then you might go the other way and be like, I don't want anything to do with this. I don't want to look at it or touch it because I don't want to be responsible. So that is another way. And another thing is some may find themselves avoiding responsibility while they're working on their recovery in order to keep stress levels down. And while I do believe that there is a balance in terms of how much you might want to take on while you're focusing on your recovery, you don't want to be avoiding taking on normal life responsibilities, and you don't want to be avoiding taking next steps in your life because of OCD, whether that's take the responsibility of buying a house or a pet or something, or changing jobs. But some people may wish to avoid taking on new responsibilities at work because of stress levels. And where this is the case, it may be down to a fear of fear. So where you may have previously found yourself extremely stressed out by this kind of thing, you really, really want to avoid that. And I have to say, I'm somebody who has been guilty of that previously. And it's something I still have to remind myself of, that I do have the experience to take on other responsibilities at work, and I don't need to be afraid of a small amount of stress, because actually stress in small levels can be helpful to us. It motivates us to do things, to take action, to make changes, to push forward. So we don't want to be running away from any kind of life stressors, because unfortunately it just is a big part of life, and the feeling of concern or a little bit of stress is there for a reason. Because it can be useful to us. So there's definitely a balance there, and we don't want to be avoiding responsibility in our OCD recovery. In addition to trying to avoid stress. Another reason people may try to avoid taking responsibility for things when they have OCD or in their OCD recovery is also the fear of doing something wrong and making mistakes, and the fear of maybe perhaps that being a trigger for them as well for their OCD. But again here, when you're working on your OCD recovery, you're practicing accepting yourself for all of your good stuff, but also your faults as well. You're accepting yourself as a fallible human being, the way every other person on this earth is. A person who can sometimes make mistakes, but can also be successful. It might be avoiding responsibility because of the fear of failure, and the same applies here. We want to be practicing taking these risks, taking on the responsibilities that can make us help us to live a more fulfilling life and go further in life. And accept the fact that sometimes we might balls it up, and that's okay, because we're human beings and we will from time to time make mistakes. So I hope that has been useful in some ways. If you've found that you have a sometimes troubling relationship with the idea of responsibility, whether that is the over-responsibility or avoidance of responsibility, or as perhaps I've found a little bit of both actually at different points in my life. It is, again, it's balance. But thank you very, very much for watching, and I will see you soon. Bye.